Well, guys, it's a pleasure to be here to talk with Mike. Mike, thanks for joining us. I see an awesome Kraken jersey in the background there. So for all of those not from Seattle, go Kraken! We're having a great season. But Mike, could you just briefly introduce yourself and your role here at Microsoft, and we'll sort of jump in from there.
Sure, sounds good. First, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And so at Microsoft, I'm our VP and GM for data governance and privacy products that we deliver to our customers. But also the other part of our group is a team of practitioners and engineers that manage data governance and data privacy for Microsoft itself.
And so, I know you guys are operating a massive lake at a huge scale. Maybe you can give us just sort of some idea of Microsoft has all these different lines of business. You have Windows and Xbox and you have Azure, and is all of that in the lake, and sort of what's sort of the scope of what you're managing from a governance perspective?
Sure, yeah, great question. So across all of Microsoft, from Windows to Office to Azure, Dynamics, Xbox, kind of everything in between, the company leverages a data lake or a collection of lakes, as the backing store for a lot of our data. Last I checked, that was running north of about 13 exabytes in scale. You've got thousands of teams, tens of thousands of users, interacting with it in different ways, from data science through to BI and other workloads.
I mean, that's just a massive scale. I mean, I assume you didn't start by, hey, there's data everywhere, and now you created a 13 plus exabyte lake. Maybe you can help me understand, how did and why did the lake get formed, and what was sort of the evolution of that? How did it even get to where it is right now?
That's a great question. I think we probably started like a number of companies. It started quite a while ago for us, kind of before Hadoop was a word. But the idea was, ultimately, how can we collect more at scale, derive new insights? That started in a couple of our major businesses, Bing and Windows and whatnot. And as I think business value started to get seen, uncovering new signals from data, then it started to take off across the company. You started to see different organizations get curious about what they could do with data. And then, data lakes just formed this new opportunity to scale storage of data just at a cost that hadn't been possible before.
I mean, are you still seeing it evolve? It's still growing, and you're seeing more and more adoption of the lake as, let's say, performance and technology has been improving, or is it you sort of feel like it's now the de facto standard for how analytics is being done across the company?
I would say across the company, it is the basis for collecting data, right? Especially as all the, let's call it raw data, comes into the organization and starts its journey from refinement or enrichment or model training or whatever it may be. That really is the basis for collection of data. It helps us scale that across the org. And I think the challenges now are, of course, continuing to scale the infrastructure to keep up with the ever-growing desire for more data across the company, but then also making it, I think the new challenges have come in terms of making it more efficient to be able to find the data you need, interact with others, ensure we're doing it, in appropriate ways around whether it's a privacy need or an expectation of our customers, whatever it might be. So it's really about driving efficiency of use of the data in the lake, as we've matured on our journey. But it started out in, I think how many do, how do you get established with the infrastructure? How do you get the data in? How do you get the business buy-off, and kind of evolve from there?
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about at the scale you're dealing with. One of probably the biggest challenges you have is, the classification of data, just even the knowledge of what's in the lake. And maybe you can talk to me just about how are you guys doing that, and then maybe how have you started to solve for problems that you've come as you've gone on this journey. The scale you're doing it at, it's not possible to just manually have people just enter in information and get the metadata of what's landing. How are you doing this at such a scale every day?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think it's one of the challenges that many of us have tried different approaches and tried to learn what works as this scales across your organization. And so for us, it started out where we were collecting a lot of data, but we didn't have that enhanced knowledge about it, classification and so forth. And so one of the approaches we've taken is, how do we apply techniques people use in the public internet against the data lake? So we built a technology that allows us to look across the data lake, if you scan the data lake, if you will, and apply classification, on an ongoing basis. So we're constantly understanding the lake, we're understanding it in new ways as new business requirements come in. And so we're scanning it at scale about twice a day to understand the semantics of what's there. And from a maturity perspective, like, we constantly want to be driving this more upstream, right? So as tools are collecting data wherever it's born and bringing it together, we want to be, understanding as much about that data on the way in as possible. That ultimately makes it, more usable and discoverable for our users. But, practical realities come in, right? There's all kinds of tools and approaches for, bringing data into a lake. And so we've found kind of a two-pronged approach over time works. Trying to classify and annotate data on the way in, but also making sure we have automation and data scanning to make sure anything that gets in there, we have a better understanding of what and where it came from.
Yeah, so it sounds like one of the first pieces of technology you had to create was, and you started with, let's just look at everything that's new that came into a lake versus, from a certain time, and scan that and be able to then apply, some metadata to that data, and then also apply the classification as part of the metadata on that data. And then you've been evolving that to try to get even farther upstream into the data pipelines. Is that right?
I think that's a great articulation of it. The one thing that we learned, though, very quickly is you can't just kind of start from here and move forward in time, because quickly you're going to need to ask questions about historical data for, deep analysis reasons or compliance reasons or whatnot. So we ultimately have to build something that could scale to the size of our lake and could analyze it. Because if you decide that you want to classify data in a new way, oftentimes our users require us to classify it for all data in the lake starting back from the beginning of time. And so we had to build something that could really scale and take advantage of the scale characteristics of a data lake to work across such a huge volume of data. And then absolutely, the ideal is you get it upstream into the ingestion tools, and the ingestion tools are able to, label and classify the data as it comes in, so that, you have, if you will, kind of the most mature governance stance the moment the data comes in. But that's a continuing journey for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. This is obviously something you guys built to, solve your own problems internally. Just from a scale perspective, is this something that, the customers or people watching here at Subsurface, is this technology that they're able to take advantage of as well as they're thinking about, hey, how do I deal with governance across our lakes? How do we ensure we actually have knowledge of what's in and getting the metadata and the classifications in as quickly as possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. So short answer, yeah. Like, one of the things that we were doing as we were solving our own problems, and one of the fun parts of the role is I get to interact with a lot of CDOs and CISOs and CPOs across organizations. And, it turns out a lot of folks had these common challenges. And so what we've been doing is productizing some of the work and generalizing it to work in different infrastructures, different clouds, on-prem, to be able to bring this scanning and classification capability to market. Currently, we deliver this through a product we call Microsoft Purview, which is our governance product for data lakes and databases and BI tools.
Okay, that's great. In terms of that, is that part is moving into the pipelines part of that roadmap, or is that just a different technology that you're developing that where both of these, like Purview and something else, will work together, or are you trying to put that all into sort of one overall solution for customers?
That's a great question. I think if I kind of step back and look at it from a general governance perspective and kind of put my practitioner hat on, all of us need signal into however data is being used, wherever it's being used, whatever tool is interacting with the data. And so with that thought in mind, and hearing that from our customers, the way we're approaching this is really turning Purview into a platform. We think of it as it's your metadata, not ours. And so what we're doing is we're creating as many open APIs and plugin points as we can, so that anybody can participate in enriching the understanding of data coming into the lake, so that ultimately, the customer can get the most value from it. So So short answer, no, not a closed stack in that, it's with our ingestion tools or whatnot. Instead, thinking about how can we enable customers to create, if you will, a data map of all the data they have, wherever it came from, and then allowing anybody to participate in enriching and reading from that map. So ideally, the ingestion tools and other tools can both enrich a customer's understanding of their data in the lake, but also benefit from that in maybe helping automate some of their experiences.
Yeah, so there's tools that'll automate a portion of, let's say, the metadata, but then individuals or even other tools could come in and enrich that metadata, and then that is, broadly available or is available through different governance policies that you're setting.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
outstanding. Yeah, one of the things that I want to touch on a little bit is obviously you guys have so much data in the lake, and that could get expensive. And some, if you're scanning all the records all the time, or you're querying across these massive data sets, that could add a lot of cost. And so, how have you guys thought about, where's the value? Which data has the most value, and then how do you deal with sort of that trade-off between, value and cost management across a lake that's so big?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I think we all, try to manage that trade-off all the time, right? And so what we've found as a governance team is, at times, governance can be approached a little academically, but it's so important to think about, the analysis we're doing of the data and how can we create more insight to the lake owner and the lake, administrator in terms of where are things being used the most? What are people querying over the most? Where's the most sensitive data that you should keep keep a closer watch on than others? And we try to provide those insights back both to our users across Microsoft and the various domain administrators that we have, so that they can optimize their investment from a governance and metadata perspective, but also optimize how that data is stored. When you think about tiering and what needs to be in hotter, warmer areas of the lake versus cooler areas of the lake. And so what we found is that governance layer can really, and that enriched metadata layer can really help both in cost optimization of query, but also cost optimization when you think about governance and compliance and that side of it. So we think of that within Microsoft as one of our primary tasks. And I think the important thing is that often kind of, perhaps doesn't get the rigor in certain organizations, is defining those KPIs for your business and showing how your investment in governing the lake helps you improve both from a cost side and efficiency side.
Yeah, so you let the business owners end up having responsibility, and then you're able, through some of the technology and work you're doing, to provide them with the reporting or the analysis talking about, hey, here's essentially what your business is spending, and sort of here's how your analysis is looking. And these might be some, I don't know if you go so far as to say, here's some recommendations that, we may suggest that you do for you to take, ownership of how you're managing your costs within the lake.
Absolutely. So, and the other key things here are, in addition to thinking about storage and whatnot, is some big insights we learned as we started to get more insight into the data, especially when you can start to understand the relationship between data sets in your data lake through a lineage and whatnot perspective. You can quickly find where people across the company are doing duplicate work. Mm-hmm. It's like, you could be building on the work of others and expanding it versus getting to that curated set, for a second time. Especially as we see lakes adopted in mid to large organizations, things are so distributed that it's hard to know sometimes that there is interesting work being done in sections of the data. And so what we found is understanding individual data sets, but also the relationships between them in the lineage, helped us shine a light for different groups that, hey, you know what, there's duplicative work here, and you could build off the work here, and you guys could join forces. And that helped us really optimize how we thought about, continually building on the work of others versus always starting, if you will, from the raw data in the lake.
I mean, is that something the technology is helping you identify? Is sort of those overlapping areas, or is that something that the team sort of just looks at patterns and you have analysts that are pulling that out? I don't want to say necessarily manually, but with some help, or is that really you've gone almost full automation on that?
For us, at least at the scale and number of users, these analysts wouldn't fly. And so we've really tried to automate this. We think of it as like from a governance perspective, you're always going to have people in process to drive the program forward. But what we're really trying to do is bring as much technology assist where, the more we can learn about the interaction with the data, how it moves, how it's being transformed, the more we can suggest to folks, you know what, there's a piece of data that your colleague worked on across the company that may be a great starting point for you. And so what we've started to do inside the company is generate those reports for different data owners in terms of, what there looks like the heritage of data from what you're pulling in matches a lot with what we've seen in other areas. And so we try to connect those folks across the company so they can collaborate and they can have a discussion and see if there's work that they can build on for each other or at least share ideas.
As you find those in your reporting, is that just, hey, you're sending an email to the lines of business and connecting the people and just saying, hey, you guys should get together, we noticed this? Or does that sort of collaboration happen in a different manner? I'm sort of getting at how are you bridging this between central team doing governance and then the lines of business operating? You guys find something out. How do you get that connective tissue of that insights working in your favor and working in the business's favor?
That's a great question. I think, this is the key thing is really enabling collaboration in the tools that users are in and making it as seamless as possible. So what we're trying to do is the tools that we provide our users to discover data and understand data, we're trying to surface insights right there to them. So it's not like they have to, start an email chain and interact and get connected. But our thinking is that the goal of the tools really is to help people be more productive with data. And that means helping them find other interesting ideas that are similar to theirs, helping them get connected with other folks in the organization right in the tool chain they're in. So in our data catalogs and other data discovery experiences, we're creating collaboration capabilities that surface these insights and help them get connected and maybe start a Teams chat or a Slack chat with those other folks that are working on common problems that they may not even know about. And so what we're thinking about is we think a lot around from the time you discover data to the time in which you're using and interacting with it and collaborating with others working in similar domains. How can we shorten that and allow people to iterate there as fast as possible?
That's great. Mike, I'm going to shift because we've been talking a lot about, okay, well, the data comes in and we're going to apply metadata and we're going to create this map. So we're going to flip to the user side of the house, the data consumer. Let's say somebody new starts at Microsoft. And we got to figure out, we want to give them as much access as possible, right? So they can be agile and they can move quickly and they can drive their business forward. But that also has to adhere to a set of policies that you have. How does that work? Someone starts, there's no way that can be just a man, with the scale. You said you have tens of thousands of users. How do you know what permissions to give them? And then, how do they get additional permissions? How are they going to get access to the data they need without a bunch of bottlenecks?
I think that really gets at the crux of the challenge, right? For us, we think of governance as trying to enable as much agility around data while always ensuring right use, meaning data is being accessed at the right time under, per corporate standards or regulatory requirements. And so to get to kind of the heart of your question, we're approaching it in kind of two ways. One is we really want to empower the, I'll call data administrators, the policymakers of your organization to be able to articulate kind of how data should be used and how data may be used in your organization. And today what we found in talking to customers is everybody's doing this in terms of what are the policies for data use so that when new people join, they can automatically be granted certain amounts of access and not others. But the challenge is taking those policies that are often expressed in English or in natural language and making it so on the data lake and enforcing it at scale. And so we've been spending a lot of time working on technology to enable articulating data policy that automatically is pushed down and enforced inside native data systems like data lakes and databases so that we can be clear about what type of access should be granted, but then how it translates down isn't a manual process or schemas upon schemas or views upon views. Instead, think of it as compiling policy down to native enforcement. That's half the equation. But of course, as people get into it and start working, they find other data that they'd like to access. And so we've also been working on a self-service experience for our customers. And we're trying to navigate, kind of put that right into the data discovery tools. So that as you discover new data and look at, this could be fit for my purpose, right there, you should be able to request access, get connected with the data owner. And if the data owner, finds that your access and the purpose of access and whatnot meets the requirements, should be able to grant access as quickly as possible. And so we're doing this in a lot of our governance tools as well, because I think ultimately it's from discover to understand to get access as quick as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that you guys are getting, even with all that automation around, this is likely the set of data this particular new person or person who's maybe changed role should have access to. That's probably changing literally every day. People changing jobs, people starting, people leaving, et cetera, all being managed. Then you have, I would imagine, thousands of requests coming in for, I want access to this data, et cetera.
Yeah.
Is that something that's all done manually? Like you're looking at that and you have somebody who goes through and says, yes, this person should get access to it based on information you have, or you've been able to use the technology you're developing to automate a lot of that?
The important thing is understanding your data. Like if you understand the semantic meaning of the data and the connection to business purpose and sensitivity level, then what we've found is establishing policy to automate access is possible. And so short answer, yes, we're trying to automate as much of that as possible. But if you don't have a rich understanding of what that element of data is in your data lake, it becomes a risky proposition to automatically grant access. And so what we found is our maturity model is getting data in, understanding it deeply from both a business and classification context, and then using that context to drive access policy. And then ultimately that access policy is what automates things.
I think what I hear you saying is, you're only able to deliver that level of automation because you guys have put so much work and effort over time in ensuring what's in the lake and the sensitivity classification that's in the lake and who should have access to it, so that then when requests come in, you can automatically, in many cases, probably not all, but in many cases, actually just grant that.
That's precisely it. I think it's gaining that level of understanding is so key.
Yeah, like do not grant access if you don't understand your data and the semantics of the data. It's like start with step one and then you can move to step two.
And I think, early on, I think everybody got so excited, us included, about what potential data lakes offered, right? For the first time, you could kind of collect everything and the cost profile made sense. And, then it quickly became, well, if I got everything, how do I get access? But there was kind of that missing step of a deep understanding of all sections of the lake, and then we started to hear, well, how do I make use of it from the business? How do we turn this into business use? And so what we found, I think you articulated it so well, is really making sure you have that solid understanding, not just physically of what's there and the files and the size and whatnot, but its connection to business purpose and sensitivity level.
No, that's great. One of the things that, I'm sure that you're dealing with is you have more and more people within Microsoft who want to use data as a part of their jobs. It's not just the analysts anymore. It's the business users. And, assuming that you have that knowledge and you're then able to pass that into saying, oh, well, now these business users can even get access to this data. Let's say they don't write SQL or they don't have the ability to maybe interact with data the way that it's been done in the past. Are you guys innovating in that way to make it more, from a, let's just say a search perspective or even a chat perspective? Has that been something that you've been working on and trying to evolve to help the organizations become more data driven?
Absolutely. Short answer, absolutely. I think early on, I'm going to say lakes were for the technical half of the organization, right? Data engineers, data scientists, et cetera. And increasingly, we're trying to make everybody a data consumer in some form. And one of the key things we've been working on is how do we create an experience where our business analysts and whatnot can easily find data in a way that makes sense to them, through the language of the business. And so, a lot of innovation has happened recently with, large language models and other. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about how can we leverage that technology into our discovery experiences so people can just reason about and look for data in a way that's most natural for them. And then potentially also create an consumption and interaction experience, based on what they're looking for. And, I think there's a huge opportunity in, connecting this with low code and no code experiences.
Got it. Yeah. So, I mean, the idea is right now they could go and probably do some sort of discovery via search, right? Like they're searching, but you're likely to be searching in your business terminology.
That's right.
And the data still might be in its much more like technical level terminology. Are you working to try to bridge that, more automatically into business semantics, or is that something that's still like different business groups will go and apply the semantics so that as you're layering in, search and chat and these other things, it's actually contextually aware to whatever that domain is?
Short answer, absolutely. Like we talked a lot earlier about obtaining additional information about the data classification and other. We think of bringing this all together into a data map, which is effectively a knowledge graph about your data. Not just physically what's there and its partitions and its classifications, but also its business purpose, its business terminology, the entitlements and consent you have to that data, the health of the data, and so forth. And so we think about feeding all of that in. Imagine you feed all that information in to a model and then let people just reason about it with the language that makes sense to them, right? I think that's ultimately where we need to get. And it's less about, do you have this facet or that facet on the data, and more just you express what you're looking for, whether you're a data scientist or a business user, and then we've got all this rich context to reason about that request. And so
Yeah, so that makes sense.
program.
Yeah, and it all starts with that initial, like you got to have all the knowledge of the data, because you're almost saying data comes in, we're creating this rich set of, for lack of better, like structured metadata around it. And then on top of that, you're creating the knowledge graph. And then
That's
on
right.
top of that, what you're creating are all these different user experiences to try to enable more and more people to get access to the data. Is that essentially sort of how it's worked as part of your evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you put it really well. And I think at the end of the day, for those of us that work in governance and privacy and whatnot, it's so important to, follow a model like you just described in connecting it to the needs of the business and kind of getting away from that thought of, governing is somehow an academic or compliance-based, only compliance-based thing. Absolutely not. This provides the context so you can open up your lake to more users.
That's great. Well, Mike, we got just under a minute left. So if there's, one thing you're talking to everyone who's managing lakes right now, and you want them to be aware of, like, hey, this is how you should get started in manage, getting better at your governance at scale. What would that be?
Yeah, the biggest thing we've found is you've got to think about what is your maturity model and how can you articulate an investment as enabling your company to do more with data. And the moment we could do that in the types of ways you were just describing is what really empowered those investments and things to take off inside of Microsoft.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing that awesome story. I'm sure you're going to get a bunch of questions about it. If you have other questions, you can ask them online. If you're viewing right now, or you can find us and see if you can chat with us on social media, and we'll try to get those questions. But thank you so much.